the third largest business for organized crime in the world now is human trafficking. Overwhelmingly, the victims of this atrocity are the poor, and especially poor women and children.
The best way for us to address this is not to incrementally just work at it each year, but to have the vision that in this world, the United States was going to take a leadership role working with other like-minded countries, and we were going to end modern slavery in our lifetime.
I've been on FBI raids where I've seen things that no person should ever see. I've seen video content of a child that's the same age as mine being raped by an American man that was a sex tourist in Cambodia. And this child was so conditioned by her environment that she thought she was engaging in play.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming a panel of individuals dedicated to bringing an end to modern slavery. Please welcome our panelists. Gary Haugen, CEO of the International Justice Mission. United States Senator Bob Corker. And founder and CEO of Thorn, Ashton Kutcher. You know, the topic that we're going to be talking about is probably as dreadful as anything can be, and so dreadful sometimes, you know, we're apprehensive even to hear about it. And yet it's happening all around us. So what I thought we'd do, and I'm assuming a lot of people in the audience really aren't aware of what's going on in slavery today, what's going on in human trafficking, is for each of you to define how you see the problem, define what human trafficking is. And why don't, you know, Gary, let's start with you.
Terrific. Thank you, Bob. And great to be back with all the Rotarians. As a former Rotary scholar, it's great to be back here with you, so thank you. One of the things that you love about the Rotary family around the world is you do take on difficult problems, and modern day slavery is just about the ugliest problem you can imagine. And it very simply is what you would think slavery is. It's people being forced to work by violence. And there are, best estimates tell us, about 46 million people held in slavery in the world today, more than in any other time in human history. So what should you picture? You should picture very poor people who are taken advantage of, told a story about a job someplace or a educational opportunity. They're enticed away from their community and then trafficked into brick making or rice mills or sometimes the sex industry or rock quarries, and they are forced by the power of just sheer terror to labor for the profit of others. This is the simple brutality of slavery. It's more vast than ever in the world today. It's brutal, but I'm so grateful for the chance that those muffled voices are no longer going to be unheard, because Rotary is in an increasing way beginning to tell the story about the truth of modern day slavery, and it's a great privilege for me to get to be here to be part of that story with you.
Ashton?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having us here to talk about this. I think when I think about the problem, it's sort of easiest to think about how I became aware of it in a sense of what it is that I'm aware of, and then kind of stay in my lane from there. So as a young man coming up in the public school system in America, I thought slavery was done.
Right.
Like you hear about Abraham Lincoln, you hear about the abolition of slavery, and you go, okay, this is a done deal. It's not really on anybody's docket. And then, as an adult, to learn not only that it's alive and prospering and growing, but that it's legitimately one of the largest illicit trades in the entire world, and the fastest growing illicit trade in the entire world, because the capital or the product is so abundant. If you're a trafficker, you're looking at this audience going, hey, there's a lot of product here that I can move. And it's very easily moved from country to country. And so when I realized that this was happening, I was in shock and awe that it was happening right underneath all of our noses. And I brought it up to a friend of mine who said, oh, no. It's happening like here, like right here. And I was in Los Angeles at the time, and he said, within any 3 blocks from where we're standing, I was inside of a synagogue. He said, within any 3 blocks of where we're standing, you can go buy somebody. And I was floored by the notion of that. We're in Atlanta, Georgia, which is one of the hotbeds for sex trafficking in this entire country. It's here, underneath our noses. And so from a sex trafficking perspective, which is where my foundation's really focused, just to give you a little sizing relative to the market, there are 125,000 advertisements that go up online that my organization looks at every single day in the United States of America. So from a sizing perspective, those are people being advertised for purchase. So that's a little bit of the scope relative to sex trafficking, and it goes much further than that, but just to get sort of a range of what we're dealing with here.
Now, Senator Corker, we heard earlier what the government's done to step in and eradicate a disease, polio. Well, this is a disease. It's a different disease, and if you just stop people from doing it, everybody would be cured. Why don't you address your view of human trafficking and what you feel can be done?
Let me start by saying my introduction to... I'm now off. We can do... My introduction to...
Here you go. We've got a guy here who knows how to do this stuff. Although that's a great photo right there.
So let me begin with my introduction to this issue. Really began right here in Atlanta, Georgia, where I heard the words of Louis Giglio, renowned minister here in town, talking about this issue, and when he came to a close, said these words: "If not you, who?" If you're aware of what is being discussed here, if you're aware of what Ashton and Gary have just discussed, and you know that it's happening in your community and around the world, and you don't do something about it, what does that say about us? So for us, it was hearing those words, it was meeting with Gary, it was going to the Philippines and seeing the work that people are doing there. And by the way, the most impactful thing is to meet with people who are victims. In the Philippines, seeing these young ladies who thought they were going to visit Manila for the day and some nice man was going to take them there and bring them back, and they find themselves in a brothel in Malaysia or some other place for 7 or 8 or 10 years. It's knowing that that is happening around the world, and that our nation has been the leader in ending things like HIV, or maybe the model of you, Rotary International, doing what you have done with polio, which is just absolutely fascinating, but building on those thoughts and putting together a global fund. Right now what we're finding, Bob, is that there are lots of incremental efforts that are taking place by people that are doing great work, but it hasn't been pulled together where the world community is using best practices to end this scourge on mankind. And so what we've done is we've created something called the Global Fund. We have passed authorizing legislation in Congress. We have appropriated dollars, and the purpose is to create a massive world public-private partnership to build off the strengths of
people like all of us here combined with government so that we leverage our resources to do what is necessary to end this scourge.
Yeah, one of the things that I guess we all sense is the underbelly of the internet is this incredible vehicle that's out there to do good, but also does bad. Ashton, I know you've addressed this in a very serious way with Thorn. Can you tell us a little bit about what the problem is and what can be done to address that problem?
Sure. So to make sure that we're being specific, because I think trafficking is really, really broad, from labor trafficking of various types and sex trafficking. What we really focus on is the sexual exploitation of children relative to trafficking, but relative to other things.
Right.
So specifically about that, when I first got into this issue and realized that there were children, and not just children, but babies that were being sexually abused in this way, I started unearthing as much information as I could, and one of the facts that came up really quickly was that 70% of the transactions around sex trafficking were happening online, or in some way, shape, or form touching the online world, which as a venture capitalist in early stage startup technology, I understood very well. If you want to run an efficient business, use the tools that are online. So if you sort of scroll back and think about how a transaction for sex used to happen, it used to happen very much out in the open. If you knew that there were people being sold, they would be on a track somewhere, which is probably a specific part of town, and you would go there, or a brothel, and you would go there and actually make the physical transaction and then find a place to do what you're going to do. Well, now it's the internet at large, and a lot of classified environments on the internet are using it as a marketing resource for those people. So when someone wants to list a human being, they go to this platform, list the human being, give the contact information of how to get a hold of them, and then meet in a discrete place. So it actually doesn't happen out in the open the way that it used to. But we realized that the internet is also out in the open, and that there was something we could do about it. The biggest bind that we found in the funnel to actually figuring out what was going on was within law enforcement. So there were so many cases that were being put to law enforcement, and the staffs for law enforcement were so underserviced in this particular area, we thought it would be right to create software to make their process far more efficient, where we could identify who the victim was, identify generally what the age of the person was based on some algorithms that we built, and then identify whether that person was most likely under control of another person in order to create prioritization for law enforcement. And then beyond that, we were able to create a database that allows us to understand where that person's being trafficked from city to city, state to state, and what the movement of those individuals are. And as a result of that, in 12 months since deploying, and these aren't up-to-date stats, but within 12 months since we've deployed it, we've been able to identify over 6,000 trafficking victims, 2,000 of which are minors, and over 2,000 traffickers on our platform.
Oh, wow.
So, and we built some other tools that do some other things, such as deterrence, because it's also important to realize that it's not one of these things that we're going to be able to just arrest our way out of. We've got to figure out how to message to people that this activity, while people generally realize it's not a good thing, there's a normalization of the activity in a lot of communities that we also have to get under control. So we're running ad deterrence campaigns for people in this space that are extraordinarily effective. We're actually leveraging the same tools that marketers use to sell whatever products they want you to buy, to actually send messaging directly to people that have a proclivity towards this and reverse their action. And our click-through rates are better than almost any corporation in America on our advertising. So it's about really curbing the appetite and then solving the downstream problem, and we can use technology to fill a lot of those voids.
Wow. Senator Corker, I heard that only recently was it illegal to for the credit card companies to allow humans to be sold using a credit card. I mean, that's obviously, that's the government stepping in and doing something. You've been a wonderful advocate of the government stepping in and things being done that need to be done. Can you talk about that?
Sure. We're in the process right now of reauthorizing numbers of efforts here domestically to give the kind of tools to local law enforcement that are necessary to give grants, training, to make sure that just in the last year and a half, believe it or not, you couldn't use the normal wiretapping legislation to deal with this issue. And we gave states and local community that ability recently. You know, in this age of things being trafficked by social media and on the internet, you've got to use those tools, and so they've been very effective. If I could digress for one, so all those things are being reauthorized right now. I really do believe that this global fund will pull the world together around this issue. I really believe that with all of my heart. We already have governments coming in. We have private sector people that are wanting to be involved. But to Ashton, I don't think people fully realize what he just said in some cases. Almost every law enforcement entity now in Tennessee is utilizing the product that he didn't just give money to create, but he created it. I mean, it's an issue of...
In all fairness, with a lot of help from a lot of people.
Yeah. But it's one of those areas, it's a problem where people like Ashton and Gary are using entrepreneurialism to solve a social problem in our community. And so what we're doing at the federal level is doing all of those things necessary to create those synergies to allow those to thrive even more so. So again, we're wanting to make sure that the very best of what Ashton is doing, Gary is doing, you're going to meet Rebecca in just a minute, so many people around our country. And by the way, Bob, this is an issue I had no idea when we began. This is an issue that is energizing young people across America like nothing I have ever seen in my life, which gives me huge hope for the future of our nation and the world. So,
yeah. Gary, you have a very global view in what you do of human trafficking, slavery around the world. Can you give us a perspective of how it might change from country to country, or how
Sure.
Is it the same thing or is it different?
Sure. So what you want to picture is about these 46 million people held in slavery around the world. Again, as Ashton said, this is more people in slavery than in any other time in human history. So what does that look like? Well, the International Labor Organization says about 21% of them are victims of sex trafficking, where the labor, the business they're in, is the business of rape for profit. So that's about as ugly as you could imagine. The other 80% or so are forced to do the regular kind of labor, as I mentioned, sort of in brick factories or in rock quarries or in agricultural plantations. And you might drive by those facilities in your own country and you'd have no idea that they are being held there by the force of terror. So the fundamentals of this should be quite familiar to you in many ways. Because decades ago, there were millions of people vulnerable to polio. There was a perfectly good vaccine that existed, but it just didn't get to those who were most vulnerable and in need. There is a vaccine for fighting slavery. It's two things. It's great law enforcement and great services for survivors. And we now are able to measure, when you bring those things to bear in every country, you can actually measure now that those slavery rates will fall. And so this is the huge opportunity that's before this generation, and why I think it is energizing so many young people, because they're just not willing to have the book of the history page turn, and for them to be responsible for having more slaves in their world than ever and not having done the right thing about it. And this is why Rotary is an organization like no other, because of your global reach, your determination, your boldness on tackling tough problems, that gives us tremendous hope for the future.
Yeah, I was I was talking one day to Ed Ashton, who's the CEO of Delta Airlines, and we were talking about Atlanta's airport and the issues of human trafficking because you have the world's busiest airport. And he was talking about the Delta, or he told me Delta has trained 50,000 of its employees on what to do when they spot something and what to look for. You know, the general population, I mean, what would you be looking for in your neighborhood or in your, you know, as you're just going through your flying on a plane or whatever your normal routine is, how do you spot it?
Well, it depends upon the area that you happen to be in, but certainly for those who are in the industries that deal with sort of customer service, especially places like massage parlors, or there are places that are places of entertainment, or even places when sometimes people gather, even like a Rotary conference where there's lots of money because people gather. The traffickers will, especially in the sex industry, try to take advantage of those situations. So it's a little bit like the terrorism approach, where if you see something that doesn't make sense to you, and usually it is someone who's being led along by someone else in a way that they seem to be afraid to talk about, those kinds of situations, especially involving children, it's just always helpful to let local law enforcement know. People will say, well, I don't know if it is or anything. Let local law enforcement sort that out. But I would begin with making sure the people in your community know about the problem, making sure your local authorities are aware that you care about this problem, and then a willingness of all citizens, if there's something that just doesn't look right, you report it, and you just let law enforcement do their job.
Well, Ashton, I saw a video on, that Thorn had that had in there if these people that are on the internet doing these things, how you'd flash up a message and that essentially said, we know what you're doing.
Yeah.
That seemed like it would be a pretty big deterrent.
Well, we changed that tactic.
Okay.
So, adjacent to trafficking is child pornography, which is a huge issue that we think we can tackle. We think that there's a possibility that we can eliminate child pornography from the internet. And the reason why...
Sure there is.
It's going to take a while. It's no short-term effort, but there's a possibility that we can do it. And the reason why this is really important, and I'll get to your question, is we read a research paper that said that people who are exposed to this type of material have a higher proclivity towards a hands-on offense. So if you want to go upstream and solve a problem, you try to get as far upstream as you can and solve the first incident. So I had an interesting interaction. There's a man who I'll keep his identity confidential, but he's the chief technology officer for a giant unicorn technology company. Unbelievable person, unbelievable technician. When he told us a story, we were presenting what we do, and he told us a story that when he was 9 years old, he was in an AOL chat room, and he saw a piece of child pornography. And at 9 years old, he didn't know what that was or why it was interesting or why he was watching it, but he watched it. And then he developed an appetite for watching it. And while he never committed a hands-on offense, for years to follow, this man was consuming this material. He was creating a demand for this material, not necessarily even realizing that, and then fell into alcoholism because he didn't know how to place this thing that was happening in his head. But at 9 years old, I've yet to meet a malicious 9-year-old that was looking to hurt that kid that was being abused. But this is actually, and could potentially become an epidemic in our country if we don't find a way to eliminate that. Subsequently, he found help and is now in a much better place, which leads me back to the ad retargeting, which is we started by saying, the internet is not anonymous, we know where you are. And we collected, I think it was on the order of like 3 million people that were trying to download this content. We had started to have an understanding of where they were, and we started sending them that messaging, and all that did was make them push back. It's a mental health issue at the root. On all sides of the equation, it becomes a mental health issue. But the abusers have a mental health issue that has to be treated with empathy. So we changed our messaging relative to those folks so that they said, and showed them a place where they could go get help. And we have people calling that have this issue to get help, like on a regular basis, and have started to show like increasing. The more we massage the messaging, the more people we get to call, and we're actually helping both sides of the equation, because anger and frustration isn't going to fix this, but love can. And if we can treat everybody with love and empathy, and then dissect where the mental health issues are and extract those, then we can actually start to solve the problem.
Senator Corker, most of us have children, grandchildren, and we'd be concerned that they would go down a path that would lead to this. In a normal family situation, what should we watch out for? What are the dangers? What are the things that would, what is the path to human trafficking?
So I think in many ways Gary's hands-on experience can, with so many experiences with young people, could share that. But I think young people becoming vulnerable in a situation where they're estranged from their family. I mean, you have so many kids that end up in situations where they're looking for help for whatever reason from someone who's a little bit more mature or an adult, and it's in those situations where this person acts as if they're going to be a caretaker for this person, and then gradually takes those steps, especially in the sex trafficking component, to move them into those arenas. So it's just the vulnerability. And the things that you can look for, as you mentioned and asked about earlier, I mean, I think when you see at a mall, a regional mall or someplace where people are gathered, and you can see a somewhat frightened young person who happens to be with an adult, certainly the airlines, one of the leaders of our effort became involved in this because she saw a young lady who looked like she was in that kind of situation, felt like she was being trafficked, went to find an airport official. When she came back, they were gone. For the rest of her life, she's been involved in this issue. So again, it's noticing vulnerabilities. And for people who aspire or end up being in this situation, it's people who again are looking to adults, especially on the sex trafficking piece, for guidance, for help in a situation where they find themselves not having the support mechanisms they need.
Can I add something here, Bob? Because it's sometimes confusing because we're talking about slavery, but why is it called trafficking? Because in many respects, you don't have to move the person at all for it to be trafficking. But many times the victims of slavery have been moved. Now, why is that? Because if you're trying to enslave someone, what you want to do is separate them away from their community that supports them, away from their family, away from their village. So that's why they frequently traffic them away from the community to another state, to another part of the country where they don't speak the language, or to another country where they're totally vulnerable. And so this is where most of us are not going to have our children necessarily be highly vulnerable in that way, because we tend to keep our children and young people close within the protection of our communities. But you're going to have vast numbers of people around the world, especially those who are poorest, who are going to be told a story that there's a job over here, that there's an educational opportunity, and they will leave those protections and be highly vulnerable, and they will then be in maybe your communities in that vulnerable place. So it's going to be incumbent upon us to provide the kind of protection that they have otherwise been separated from.
Let me wrap up our discussion right now and say, first of all, my gosh, I mean, we all are blessed at what you're doing. I mean, the work that you guys are dedicating your time and your resources to is truly amazing. The other thing is I think we get a sense that it's everywhere, that what we're talking about, I mean, it's a commercial venture, as you said. I assume it goes where the money is, which means, it could be in our neighborhood, probably is, within some range of where we live. And yet, for all that we care about it and all we're doing, we aren't victims. I mean, we're victims because it's happening, but we're basically I was going to say 3 middle-aged guys, but one younger guy who's out there really
I'm
working on it.
so much older than I look. I'm so much older.
That's right. Right now, I'd like to bring somebody on who has a different perspective on it, somebody who can talk a very personal way about it. And I'd like to ask Rebecca Bender to come out right now and tell us her story.
Hello, everyone. It's so exciting to be here. I am honored and humbled. Last year, I won the Community Service Award for our Grants Pass Rotarian Club. Do we have any Oregonians here? Yes. I also got the honorary Paul Harris Fellow, which was such an honor for me, from Phoenix. Where's our Arizona people? Yes. Rotary, you guys do such amazing work. It's really my privilege to be here with you today. Usually when I tell people that I'm a survivor of human trafficking, they say, oh, like the movie Taken? And I think, well, kind of, except I wasn't pulled out by one leg while gripping at the carpet. My dad didn't have a special set of skills to come find me. Definitely was not sold for $1 million on a yacht. So no, not really like Taken at all. But it's interesting because we all do that, victims included. We envision human trafficking in this little box because of that one movie that we saw that one time. But as survivors, we grew up in the same culture as all of you, so we envision it the same way also. What happens in Nigeria looks very different than it does in Cambodia, than it does in New York City, than it does here in Atlanta. According to a recent study by Polaris Project, there are actually 25 different typologies of exploitation in America alone. So if we're all only thinking of that one way, we're going to miss dozens of other ways that it looks in our very own communities. I grew up in a small lumber town in Southern Oregon. I was an average all-American girl who had never been put in an at-risk youth category. I played varsity sports, I was on the honor roll, and I graduated a year early, accepted into Oregon State University. The summer after graduation, I got pregnant, and I had to withdraw from my dorm room, and I stayed at home with my parents and had my daughter. But I kept moving forward. I enrolled in community college as a single mom, and after all of my friends who had gone off to the U of O, now the duck people can cheer. When all of my friends who had gone off to the U of O moved out of their dorm rooms, they invited me and my daughter to move in with them. I was really excited to get out of my small town. I realized very quickly, though, that the vulnerabilities that I had growing up, even in a good home, were still there. My parents divorced when I was young, and it was an ugly divorce. My mom became a single mom, but by high school, things had started to turn around for me. When I went off to college and moved in with my friends, those same vulnerabilities resurfaced. And while all my friends were off doing what college kids do, I was the girl stuck at home with the kid. Until I met the most amazing man. He was funny and charming, and for 6 months he dated me. He got to know my hopes and my dreams and my fears. He slowly pushed the boundaries of hypersexuality in my life. And after 6 months, he invited us to move in with him. See, trafficking is not always abductions. It's a slow, gradual expansion of boundaries and an increase of trust. The day that me and my daughter arrived in Las Vegas, which is where he moved us to, the day that we arrived, he forced me into human trafficking. For nearly 6 years, I was sold between 3 different traffickers. I had 3 other women that were in the home with us and 2 children. During those nearly 6 years, I was branded twice, having 2 different men tattoo their names on my back like a piece of cattle. My face had been broken in 5 places. I was hospitalized for dehydration and overexhaustion, and I had been to jail 7 times. But I was never kidnapped or duct taped or locked in a room with a dirty mattress. The reality is that my daughter may have gone to school with yours, that I may have stood next to you in the grocery store line, and nobody ever noticed. Nobody ever noticed because we all envision that one way, and trafficking survivors included, I went through the thought of, I got on the plane willingly. I got out of the car willingly. I didn't fully understand the complexities of force, fraud, and coercion played out in my everyday life. Thankfully, in 2007, the federal investigators raided the home and allowed me and my daughter an eventual avenue for escape. But I can tell you that running was not the hard part. The hard part was choosing poverty. The hard part was starting over at 26 with an 8-year-old girl being homeless. The hard part was having a criminal record, a huge gap in job history, and more trauma than any person should live with. The hard part was what now? I escaped, yes, but now the journey began on figuring out how to navigate this new world of normalcy with the same vulnerabilities that got me trafficked in the first place. And I know this is what this panel's about, and this is what today is about for us, is that there are many facets to fighting the largest social justice issue of our time. There's prevention and intervention for vulnerable kids that can lead to their escape. It's about awareness in our different communities so we can shift the perception of what trafficking looks like in your town. It's training for those who have the opportunity to intercept and intervene with victims that are being trafficked. But it's also about restoration, trauma-informed care, policies, job opportunities that communities can provide. It's about advocacy and long-term support for us and our families. It's all of us here today coming together, using our influence, our passion, and our professions to truly make a difference in the lives of those in slavery across the world. Thank you.
Rebecca is going to join us for the panel from this point on. After escaping 6 years of both labor and sex trafficking, Rebecca has emerged not only as a survivor, but as a strong, influential leader. She helps train the largest anti-trafficking groups and agencies in the country and around the world, including Homeland Security and the FBI. She's founded a nonprofit, Rebecca Bender Initiative, which has to date trained over 26,000 law enforcement officers. She's received numerous awards, including congressional recognition, sits on the advisory committee of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and she has used her experiences to help others.
Thank you.
We thank her for that. What we'd like to do now is finish up with one question, and that's right now in this room we have 23,000 Rotarians. Around the world there are 34,000 Rotary clubs all doing good deeds. I mean, it's just enormous what Rotary can do. There are 1.2 million Rotarians, which by the way is larger than the U.S. Army, all out with a sense of goodwill that they want to leave this earth with. So what can we do? In human trafficking, what can a Rotarian do to make a difference? And I'm going to start with you.
Well, Bob, I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca because I think we would be most interested to start there. What can Rotarians do to make a difference?
There's so many things that we all can do to make a difference. I think that we can just look at kind of that spectrum of engagement, whether it's talking to your own kids and your own teenagers and those that you're connected with, whether it's talking to those that you have influence with. Are you friends with the sheriff in your community? Have your law enforcement officers received training? Have they signed up to be part of Spotlight? Where do you fit in your own community? Who do you have connections with? And what are the various, things that people can get involved with doing?
Sure, let's face it. I mean, the beginning, Rotary is an incredible international force, and in the communities that you are in, you are the leaders. You're the people that make things happen. I used to be a member of Rotary. I understand what Rotary does, and Look, the impact that you, by just saying that this is important to you, to your local sheriff, to your governor, to your representatives. Look, Congress has passed legislation, but sometimes things, once they're passed, the energy behind it can dissipate and go away. I would just say to each of you, please, as you talk to your congressmen, as you talk to your senators, we have people here from all over the world, as you talk to the leaders of your countries, the people in your own communities, make them aware that to you, ending this moral scourge on humanity is one of the most important things as a world community that we can do, and I assure you, you can make a huge difference in this. That's what I hope you will do.
You're amazing. And you're not going to say it, so I'm going to say it for you. Her organization needs all the support she can get. She's one of the best organizations in the country at rehabilitating people, survivors, who come out of the trade and actually getting them job ready, which is a big deal. And she needs help. And we should all provide it to her because she's the true leader in this space. I actually, when I came out here and realized that Rebecca wasn't going to be out here, I wanted to give up my seat because she knows she can answer the question, how do you identify somebody? She can answer that question. I can't. We can't. She can. Help her. Beyond that, there's a great quote by Carlos Slim where he said that most people try to make the world a better place for their children when what they should really be doing is making better children for our world. So I would say first and foremost, have this very uncomfortable conversation. It's an incredibly uncomfortable conversation, but have it, and have it with the kids, and they'll understand and they'll get it, because you don't want them to be that 9-year-old that's online just surfing around and then find themselves in something they didn't want to be in. The next thing I would say is there's an inbound pipeline to trafficking that is vulnerability and poverty. And one of the greatest issues that I think we have in our country right now is the kids that are going into the foster care system that don't have someone in their life that loves them, that they don't feel loved consistently across their childhood. And how it makes them vulnerable is when somebody does reach out and shows them that love, they're in. And it's what traffickers are looking for. So if you want to get far upstream and look at something that you can take time to focus on, I think foster care is a huge issue. And my wife and I are going to start committing our resources towards making something happen there as well and using technology to do that. So your support around that I think would be infinitely valuable. And I'll just shamelessly go ahead and plug my organization. If you go to wearethorn.org/Rotary, we've set up a pipe that y'all can get as much information as you want. And there's a volunteer survey that you tell us what you do, you tell us what you're good at, and we'll help try to connect you to a resource where you can be of help on this issue. So
awesome.
Any help there would be appreciated as well. Gary?
Well, I just hope what's clear to all of us is that this problem of human trafficking, modern-day slavery, is everywhere around the world, and there are Rebeccas back home in your neighborhood and in your country. And so I would just give you 3 words. You can write down these 3 words, but these are 3 words about what every Rotarian can do back in their community. Educate. Educate yourself and your community. And that's not an easy thing, because this is a hard conversation. But secondly, serve. Serve the survivors. They're in your community. Serve them. And thirdly, encourage. Encourage who? Local law enforcement. They are given the task of fighting this crime, and they need to know they have your support. Educate, serve the survivors, encourage local law enforcement, and Rotary can change this in our lifetime.
Wow. Well, I have to tell you, you are all incredible people. We are just honored to have you here because you're people that are doing something wonderful with your lives, and we're thankful for that. This has been a remarkable discussion. I think it makes it one thing very clear, that even though slavery has been with us since the earliest generations, there's no reason why we can't end it in this generation. I want to thank each of you, not only for being with us today, but for dedicating so much of your time and passion to fight against slavery and human trafficking. Human trafficking is a massive problem, and it isn't one that Rotary can solve. But that doesn't mean we can't make a difference. If you want to get involved, you can see on the wall a few great places to start, with Thorn, with International Justice Mission, with Rotary, Rotarian Action Group Against Slavery, and with the Rebecca Bender Initiative. There is so much we can do to help. Thank you all again, ladies and gentlemen. Please join us in thanking the panelists today.